William Lawrence, who's in Washington, D.C. He's a professor of political science at American University. Good to have you back on the program, Professor. President Zelenskyy has once again called on Western powers to help impose a no-fly zone over his country, saying it really is the only way to stop the bloodshed that's currently happening in Ukraine. But the US, the UK and other governments have said that this would directly draw them into conflict in Ukraine. Do you think there will come a point, though, at which these Western powers could simply no longer refuse these calls for a no-fly zone?
Yes, it's very possible, and it's already under discussion. And if I could pull on a few threads of your question there. First of all, Zelenskyy is exactly right. They do need a no-fly zone, and there's plenty of precedent in history, but it's going to be a hard pull only really because Putin has a nuclear arsenal pointed at Ukraine and at Europe. So that's the only impediment. In terms of the other request Zelenskyy had, he wants Russian-made planes, many of which are in Europe, and that's the alternative, which is to arm the skies. The problem with that plan is that the whole point of responsibility to protect no-fly zones is that you decrease the killing, whereas if you're sending fighter planes, you're increasing the killing. And so that's not really let's say, the humanitarian or peaceful way to solve this. The big discussion in Washington right now is air corridors. As you know, the Russians reneged on their previous agreements at the first two rounds of talks, notwithstanding the blame game that your correspondent in Moscow was talking about. It's the Russians who've been reneging. And so the way to protect humanitarian corridors, whether from Mariupol or Kyiv or anywhere else, is to have air corridors defending those civilian movements, whether with or without Russian consent. And I think that's a direction that sounds promising to me.
Yes, and do you believe that in waging this war in Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has essentially made the calculations that the US and other Western powers simply would not really want to intervene with boots on the ground, and therefore his campaign in Ukraine is essentially going with impunity? Is that the calculation that Putin has made?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, he did make the correct calculation that Biden would not want to put boots on the ground or boots in the air, as he said repeatedly, which I think was a mistake by the Biden administration, because even if you don't want to do it, don't say it, because you lose, let's say, a leverage chip or a bargaining chip as you're trying to prevent Putin from invading or invading further. But what Putin got completely wrong is that he thought he was going to push NATO back. NATO's closer than ever. He thought he was going to be able to split NATO apart. NATO's more unified than ever. We now have 50,000 foreign fighters coming in from 52 countries, something he never bet on. And resistance is so bad in Ukraine now that he's probably going to need somewhere close to 1 million troops just to control the country, let alone, any further movements. So it's been a series of bad calculations by Putin, in addition to his correct assessment that the West wouldn't want to put boots on the ground.
And we know that attempts at peace talks are ongoing between Ukrainian and Russian officials. What do you think will finally get the Russians to agree to a ceasefire?
Defeats. And the Ukrainians know that, Blinken knows that, Biden knows that, everybody knows that. And that's why they're rushing so many weapons in. That's why there's so much intelligence sharing going on. Lots of things behind the scenes. We have 500 Belarusian troops coming in, 200 troops already there. And so everybody's mobilizing. There were checkpoints between Poland and Ukraine where the inflow was more delayed than the outflow because of all these people rushing in, whether as aid workers or as fighters, whether you returning Ukrainian fighters or foreign fighters coming in. So the more defeats Putin faces, financially and militarily, the faster we get to the beginnings of Russian concessions. Right now, Putin's all in. He doesn't want to turn around at all.
Okay, Professor William Lawrence, we'll have to leave it there, but really good to get your analysis there. Thanks again for joining us.